Mario Fraioli, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Um, let's let's just start. Talk a little bit about your job and what you do and how you came into doing that. I understand you're a bit of a runner, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, a little bit of a runner, which is not my job, but a lot of the things that I do are related in some way to running. So over the past, really 18 years since I graduated college, almost 19 years now, I have followed this just very meandering path to working for myself, primarily as a coach, but also as a writer and podcast host. And I would say, from a working standpoint, that's how I spend most of my time. And I'd say it's mostly skewed toward coaching. I have a number of one on one athletes that I work with throughout the year, mostly virtually, in a group here that I coach in the Bay Area where I live. But I also write a newsletter called The Morning Shakeout, which is about 7.5 years old at this point, and host a podcast of the same name. And how I got to this point, the short version of it anyway, there is no short version of it, but I worked in magazines and newspapers for many years prior to going out on my own. I was a senior editor at what was Competitor Magazine, eventually became Podium Runners, now Outside Run, which is just a digital only thing. But I was there from 2010 to 2016. Before that, I was a copy editor at a newspaper. I wrote a running column for them. So I've just been in this space doing things around coaching runners, writing about running, and talking about it in various forms for quite a long time now.
And where are you based?
I'm based in the Bay Area, north of San Francisco, at the fringes of Marin County in a little town called Novato.
Okay. I guess we'll get into this, but where'd you grow up?
I grew up in central Massachusetts, Worcester specifically, which is, you know, and I believe it's called the heart of the Commonwealth. And it really is like kind of center of the state. It is not as big of a city as Boston, but it's pretty big. It's halfway between Springfield and Boston, which are kind of the two major cities that bookend the state. But I grew up right there, dead smack in the middle.
Okay. Um, and when you started working at when you started this writing thing, you're writing a running column for a newspaper. I
Yeah.
imagine the ad that you applied for the position did not say we need a running columnist for our newspaper. Was that something you just were like, hey, in addition to my copy editing duties, I could also.
No, so interestingly, how all that started. Um, Back in 2004, after I graduated from college, I wanted to try and make it as a professional runner, in air quotes, and I wasn't good enough to sign a contract right out of school. I ran Division two. I was an All American, and I felt like with a few more years of training, I could get to a higher level and maybe make some money doing it through sponsorship, race winnings, that sort of thing. So I moved out to Eugene, Oregon, aka Tracktown, USA, a few months after graduation, and didn't make it more than 2 months. Couldn't find a job. I was actually cleaning apartments near the university. It was a through a temp agency that I had found that job, making whatever the minimum wage was at the time, and trying to run like 100+ miles a week. And it was as miserable as it sounds. And I went out there as a 22-year old with like next to no money, blew through whatever money I had and made in a matter of a couple months, and told my dad I wanted to come home. He paid for my ticket to come home, and I needed to start paying my college loans back within a few months. So I had to find a job. So I went looking in the newspaper where I ended up working, the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. I was looking through the classified ads, and they had an ad in there for a call taker in the sports department at the Worcester Telegram and Gazette. And it was 16 hours a week, 5 to 9 p.m. And I was like, that sounds cool. And I reached out to the sports editor who was the contact on the classified ad. His name was Dave Greenslet. And he remembered me because I grew up in the area and I ran in high school and college, and they'd written some stories about me, and they knew who I was. So they brought me in for an interview. They're like, yeah, we'd love to give you the job. And that was great. So I started working as a call taker. So the call taker in the sports department, you sit at a desk next to the telephone, and from 5 to 9 p.m. every night, high school and college coaches would call you and give you the results of their game, and you would take all the stats down, and you were the person who created the box score, which was on the Agate page. So for basketball, I would do the box score. Baseball, I mean, whatever sport, I would do the box score, and then I got to write up like a 2 to 3 sentence summary of the game that I did not attend, with the information that the coach who was calling it in, or equipment manager, whoever had the job that day, would give me. And I loved it. It was just the coolest job, because I didn't go to these games, but I would have to take whatever information that I was given and, write something that was interesting enough for the paper the next day, or at least that's how I viewed it. So that's how I got my start. And obviously 16 hours a week making, I think I made maybe $9 an hour doing that, is not enough to pay back college loans or live. Fortunately, I was living in my parents' basement at the time, so I didn't have rent, but I needed more income, and I also needed to get health insurance because I could no longer get that anymore. So I had another job at the same newspaper that was Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. in telemarketing. And I would be the person calling folks to renew their subscription to the newspaper, or cold calling them to sign up for the newspaper. And I hated it. I really did not like it at all. I am not good at selling. I am not good at just cold calling people. But I needed the income, and I needed the benefits, and I made that work for a little while. So at the Worcester Telegram Gazette, we had a running column every Sunday in the newspaper. And the guy who wrote it weekly was a freelancer, and the guy who wrote it weekly was a freelancer. He was the unfortunately named Ron Woodcock, and he wrote this column every Sunday, and it was terrible. Like, as someone who was interested in running and read the paper every day, it was awful. It was boring. Didn't enjoy it. Well, Ron went on vacation one week, and they needed someone to fill in and write the column for him. So Dave Nordman, who was the assistant sports editor, asked me if I'd be interested in doing it. And I was like, yeah, 100%, absolutely. And I just went all in on it. And I don't even remember what I wrote about. I definitely have that clip saved somewhere. But apparently I did a really good job. And he was like, this is way better than anything Ron's ever put out. And, you're on staff here. Do you want to write the running column? I was like, I would love to write the running column. So I started writing the running column every week for the Worcester Telegram Gazette. This is like 2004. Eventually some things happened at the newspaper. A copy editing position opened up. I applied for it. I ended up getting that job. It was not full time, but it was like 30 something hours a week. So it was enough to give me benefits, and it was like pretty much double the pay of what I was getting as a call taker. I got to work in the newsroom, and that's really how I cut my teeth with editing specifically, but with some writing too. But I had some prior experience, like writing a little bit before that. Nothing all that formal or anything, but I'd always liked writing. But I was like just super happy at that point in my life, like 22, 23 years old, and working at a newspaper in sports, which I loved, and getting to just be around it all. Those are a few great years that I had at the Telegram. I loved working in the sports department. I mean, someday I would like to write a book just about my experiences working in a newsroom. I mean, just like crazy stories, which is a whole nother podcast, unto itself. But I mean, those were some like very formative years for me, and I learned a lot. And it was a big newspaper at the time. I mean, this is almost 20 years ago now, right? And newspapers now definitely aren't what they were then, and that was like kind of right on the brink of when things were really starting to go digital, but I mean, we had a pretty big operation. I mean, we served all of central Massachusetts. We had different editions of the paper. I mean, well into the six figures in terms of like subscribers, that it went out to every week. I mean, it was, you know, in a state with the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald, and it was like right there on all the newsstands with it. So I mean, I just feel very fortunate that I had that opportunity, and again, like went in there with like the idea that I would answer phones and write little roundups and put together the agate page, which was a ton of fun. It led somewhere that I could not have even envisioned. So,
Yeah, and you still have a job writing, which is pretty amazing.
and I'm still writing. Yeah, I mean, all these years later.
Well, so I've gotten your newsletter for a long time, and I think the reason I wanted to have you on is because your newsletter is primarily about running, but
Hmm.
there's always a little bit of culture in there, and often there's some sort of musical thing. So you're not this one-dimensional guy who's just like eating, sleeping, drinking, running 24 hours a day. You're always like, oh yeah. And then I found this great cover of this such and such song on YouTube, and I thought you might enjoy that too. And you throw that in the newsletter, so that's a fun thing. So I know you have those things in your background. Should we just get to your list and start?
We could talk about how when I was in second grade, I remember this very vividly. I mean, and this is really what kickstarted the whole thing. We had a we had a class project where we got to write and publish our own book, and and that was just like the coolest thing to me when I was in second grade. And what we did, in retrospect, it was super simple. At the time, I was like, this is amazing. But we took like 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, folded them in half, so that we had a spine. And, we could write whatever story or book that we wanted to. And then we took a piece of construction paper, which was bigger than 8.5 by 11, but provided this cover, and then put another 8.5 by 11 piece of white paper on that so that it kind of had this natural sort of like border to it. So we got to design the cover, and then the teacher laminated it and
Oh wow.
gave it this like glossy sheen, and then stapled the spine together, so we had this book. And then they went in the library for like a month, the school library, so they were like on the shelf and people could um, take them out. And I mean, it was just like one of the like very vivid memories of it now, but it's like one of the coolest projects that I ever did. And I was like, I want to write books, or I want to write. And the book I wrote, I remember it. I think it's still at my parents' house. It's called the Adventures of Batman. So I wrote it, I illustrated it, and I just like I remember that project very, very vividly, and I think back to it a lot. But I'm like, that was really the spark for for all of it. I mean, fast forward to writing a blog in college when blogs were cool and there weren't a lot of college kids doing blogs, and eventually that leading to the work I did at the newspaper and doing some freelance stuff, and now the newsletter that I've been putting out every week for the last like 7.5 years. But I mean, I don't think I can talk about like creativity and like uh, inspirations and interests and all that stuff without referencing that story. So I've never got to really tell it before, but I feel like for this conversation, it's pertinent.
Oh yeah. I mean, not to mention all the movies that were spawned from that book, with Christian Bale and Heath Ledger, and
I know, where are my royalties, man?
no, that's great. I feel like creativity sometimes is a survival story, and it's the surviving of that kid who was making that book and is still psyched on
Hmm.
books, and like I feel like not enough people know that you can just do that. You can just make that book nowadays. It's called a zine, right? And you can just
Yeah,
you could maybe some of the most fun books I have on my shelves are zines that I picked up in bookstores where I'm like, this is awesome.
yeah.
And I paid $4 for it, and it was literally construction paper, printed, not like hand drawn, which I imagine yours was. I don't know. And
Hand drawn.
definitely not laminated. But we lose that. We're like, oh no, I gotta pay the bills, or I gotta do this, or that's not like
Hmm.
like that's not legitimate, or that's not a valid book. And I'm like, no, it is. You can just go.
Yeah.
You can go
No,
put.
100%. I mean, I was thinking about this before we got on to record this. I mean, all creativity really is to me, whether it's writing, whether it's music, whether you're making a film, doodling in your notebook. I mean, I even think of what I do from the coaching side of things as creativity. It's really just it's really just the actualization of your curiosity. I mean, it's like I'm curious about this thing. Let me explore it a little bit more and see, see where it goes. I mean, from a professional standpoint, that's been my whole career. It's really just been like actualizing my curiosities, and some of those have worked out to be something, and something that can help me pay my bills and allow me to, do other things. And some of those things have just totally flopped, from like a professional standpoint. But all of it, I mean, that's really what it comes back to. It's just the actualization of, my curiosity.
Yeah, yeah, or quote unquote having too much time on your hands and making something
Maybe
with it.
that too.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Okay, let's talk about the Beatles. Number one on your list is the Beatles' "Here Comes the Sun," which I believe is probably one of the most played Beatles songs on like Spotify at this point.
Has to be.
I think it is. Yeah. What can you kind of tell us this, like set the scene of if you remember when you first heard this song? How old were you? Where were you?
Yeah, I was very young. I couldn't tell you exactly what age, but very early years. And it would be in the back of my mom's car. She'd be taking me somewhere, and whenever that song came on, she would she would sing it, and she said that was my song. And I never got to ask her why it was my song, and sadly, my mom passed away suddenly at the age of 50 from a brain aneurysm, so I'll never get to ask her that. But she always used to say, like, this is your song. Whenever it would come on, she's like, this is your song. And she would always sing it. And she always made a point of letting me know. So that's just like one of those early memories that's just ingrained in my head, and has stuck with me ever since. And, after she passed, a year after she passed, I got a tattoo on my leg, as a tribute to her. And I have the Celtic cross that's on her headstone tattooed to my leg, and then behind it, I have a sun kind of popping up in the background, and that's just to kind of pay homage to her and to that song. And that's why it's personally like very meaningful to me. And just, over the years, more recently, as I've gotten older, you know, curiosity has just kind of like gotten the best of me. So I'm like, I've dug into that song, and I've dug into the lyrics, pretty deeply. And, I just always wonder, like, what was it about that song that, that led my mom to say it was like my song. So I'll never know the answer to that question. And I think there's something sad but beautiful about that. But I mean, I just like have kind of picked through the lyrics of that song. I mean, more times than I can count. And it just always reminds me of my mom. And, I have such an appreciation for it. And as you said, I mean, beyond just my personal connection to it, it's probably the most like streamed Beatles song on Spotify.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like a double meaning in the chorus for her, like son and son, and she's saying it's your
Yeah,
song.
I've had that thought too. I mean, I'm my mom's first child. She ended up having two sons, but I was the first one. So I don't know. Like I was born in May. So she carried me, mostly through the winter time, and there's a line in there that's like long, cold, lonely winter. And I was like, did she have a tough pregnancy? Was it a lonely winter for her when she was carrying me? I don't know. And then I was born and fortunately healthy, and, first, grandchild in the family, like all that kind of stuff. And there's a line about like smiles returning to the faces. So I don't know if like, that kind of helped bring her out of the winter. I don't know. I'll never know. But I like thinking about it. And yeah, it's just a really beautiful and meaningful song to me.
Yeah, I feel like there's a sort of poetry in not knowing, you know.
Yeah.
And there's like that Terry Tempest Williams book. She wrote the whole thing about how her mom gave her journals before she died or after she died, before she died, and she opened them up and they were all blank. They were just like notebooks. You know, she's like, I want you to have my journals, you know, and she writes this whole book based on that and like why were
Hmm.
they blank and interesting. I should know the name. I've read it, but
Yeah. So there's a mystery to it, for me, which, I'm actually like more grateful for than ever. I mean, if if my mom were to pop up in front of me right now, that's probably the first question I ask her, honestly, because I've just thought about it so much, in the almost 15 years that she's been gone. So I'd like to know the answer to that, but the reality is she's not here, and I'll never know. And I do think there's just something beautiful about that, because I think as humans, like, we like certainty. We want to know things. We're uncomfortable when we don't, or when things are hanging there. And for me, I mean, that song's been in my life as long as I can remember, and there's just going to be elements of it that are forever hanging there. And I've really come to just appreciate and embrace that.
yeah. My other question would be, do you know if your brother had a song? Like if your mother bestowed a song on your brother too?
That's a good question. I don't, not that I can remember. I mean, I was a little older at that point, and like I'm about 5 year, almost 5 years older than my brother. I mean, my mom was like a baby factory for 4 years. I mean, it was like one after another. My brother's the youngest of four, and he's like 4.5 years younger than me. He just turned 36, and I just turned 40 last year. So I mean, there's not a big gap. But my point being, like, when he was that age, I was 4 or 5, so I probably just didn't really pay much attention to it. And it wasn't me, right? I mean, if she was giving him attention, if anything, I was probably like, why is the attention not on me? Type of thing. So if she had a song for him, I definitely didn't recognize it, or certainly appreciate it in the same way as I do with Here Comes the Sun. But my mom loved music. I mean, my connection to music is definitely through my mom. And there was always something playing, whether it was in the house or in the car, and she would always, uh, like, with that, so like, if another song, like, she'd be like, oh, this was my high school prom song or something. I don't remember the specifics of it, but she would always have a connection to the music that she was listening to, and that definitely has trickled down to me. I don't think it's trickled down to my other siblings quite as much.
Huh. Oh, that's interesting. Like, yeah, yeah, yeah. I think about like, yeah, it'd be cool if I knew how to play an instrument so I could teach my kid how to, the value of that. But I like
Right.
also just being just a huge fan of music and having it on all the time and exposing him to all the different kinds of music there are that we have that are just beautiful in their own way is such a gift too, because that was my dad, the same way as your mom. My mom
Yeah.
could play the piano, but she would do like hour and a half long commutes to work in silence. I thought it was the most psychotic thing ever. I was like, you got a body in the trunk. Like, do we not know things about you? That's so crazy that you don't listen to music when you drive. But yeah. So number two here is Hunter
Hmm.
S. Thompson's letter to Hume Logan. Can you? I just read this just to get ready for the podcast, but I'd be curious to hear. Well, could you explain what it is and when you found it and what it meant to you at that time?
Yeah. So, Hunter S. Thompson, the great writer, um, wrote, I mean, Fear and Loathing. I mean, just look him up. I mean, just go to Google. I mean, he's been gone for a while now, but I mean, just one of the, um, I think, just like most influential writers of his generation, for sure. I actually used to read, like, toward the end of his life, he had a column for um, ESPN,
ESPN. Yep.
and it was called, like, Hey Rube, I think, and I would read that. I would read that religiously. But he wrote about sports and politics and just current affairs, all that kind of stuff. But I went down numerous Hunter S. Thompson rabbit holes in my in my early to mid 20s. And I remember like I still have it somewhere. Like I have this book of letters that that he wrote to various people, in his life. This is in like the 50s when he was in his 20s, 60s, 70s, well before, the internet and you could fire off an email to someone. I mean, he would, just write these like incredible letters to people in his life, sometimes his publishers, other writers, family, friends. I mean, they're kind of all over the place. And that's when I first came across this letter that we're referencing. It's from 1958, and it was to his friend, a guy named Hume Logan. I think Hunter was like 22, at the time, and I'd have to look at like a timeline. I don't know what he had, published at that time, but his friend Hume had written him for life advice, and he wrote him this just incredible letter where he kind of like, led off by saying like, asking advice is a very dangerous thing to do. And he's like, I respect you for asking me, but I don't really, know what to tell you. And what I really appreciate about the letter is like, you could tell as he was writing it. I've always felt writing is a form of thinking, but you could tell he was like thinking through like, what am I gonna tell this guy? And I mean, it's beautifully written, but it's definitely like a stream of consciousness type of thing. And the advice isn't like so specific to Hume, like, all right, I know these are your interests, this is the career path that you're on. I think you should do, X, Y, and Z. It was just much more, kind of much more general. And it kind of went off, I think, like on a little bit of a tangent. I mean, there's just some lines in there that are amazing. There's ones like the answer, and in a sense, the tragedy of life is that we seek to understand the goal and not the man. So he talks about like goal setting, and why he just why he doesn't like that. He's like, we shouldn't be striving for goals. We be striving to be ourselves and to and to live a way of life. And I just remember like that letter in particular just being like, holy shit, this is incredible. And I needed to, I mean, I was in, my mid 20s at the time. Like I needed to read this. So it just had that very like early impact on me as I read it, in this collection of letters that Hunter S. Thompson, had. I don't know who published that. It might have been like, posthumously or whatever. But I remember reading that, and then I just like filed it away, kind of in the back of my brain, even though I had the book, but the book wasn't something that I would like re-reference. And then, years later, it popped back up online, on this, website newsletter blog that I was subscribed to called Farnham Street, which has a lot of like just, life, kind of life advice. They try to distill, this just wisdom basically, into blog posts. But they shared that letter in its entirety. It's still online. You could, you can definitely read it. And like 3 years ago, I just started rereading it on New Year's Day every year, just as a, kind of a reminder of, during this time of goal setting, that the goals aren't really what's important. It's really, living life in a way that like sets you up to achieve the things that you want to do, but it's, more about the process than it is about the destination. And there's just a lot of other, I mean, every time I read it, I kind of pull something new out of it. And I think for me, that's the sign of a great piece of writing, is something that you can revisit. And every time you do, you find, you have like your greatest hits in there, and what you go to it for. I mean, so I go to it for all the things that I just described, but every time I read it, I find something new that I can, think about, or, figure out, or make a connection to my own life, and, how it's personally, impactful to me. So yeah, that's kind of how I found it, and how it just continues to have a place and a presence in my life today.
Yeah, that book of letters must have come out in like 1999 because I remember I had it in hardcover, and I don't know if it was in like the foreword of the book or somebody else mentioned it somewhere, but it was like they pointed out like how confident
Hmm.
he was in his writing that he saved a carbon copy of every single letter he probably ever wrote, and like how he probably considered them to be as much of his art as his books and his articles and stuff
Yeah,
like that. And like and you're like, yeah, because it's not like you could just be like, oh, he's gonna die someday, let's download his Gmail and dig through it, and like see if there's anything good in there. It was like he had a file where it was like, here's all the copies of the correspondence I've had over the years. So you find it in your mid 20s.
yeah.
Do you think you were a little bit like searching or lost in a way, and then that's why it hit you so hard, or what do you remember about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly, exactly that. I mean, I was just lost, trying to figure out what it is that I wanted to do with my life. I mean, I was still pursuing running, but I had had some hiccups, injuries, and things of the sort, and it was obvious to me, certainly by my mid 20s, that I wasn't going to be making a career as a professional runner. I had been working at the newspaper. I had some other, odd jobs, and I did know at that point, um, that I wanted to run. I loved running, even though I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. It was a huge part of my life, continues to be, and that I wanted to find a way to, to make a living. In running, I loved writing. Had done some interviews for the newspaper that I'd worked at and some freelance stuff that I was working on. I was like, man, I'm like this would be the way of life, that he kind of writes about in his letter. Like, I'm running, so it's something that I enjoy, and I can help other runners achieve their own goals. I can write about running, and there are a number of ways that you can do that, from like covering events to training advice to your own personal reflections. I did have a blog at the time where I was doing that. I had all these things. I'm like, how do I make this work? Like, I was just like, I know what I want to do. I just don't know how I make this work. There's no blueprint, and I'm 25 years old. I don't have a ton of experience in this stuff either. But so I had this idea, the way of life that I wanted to live, but I had no idea how to get there, and it was very like confusing and strange time. Like, it was definitely a bit of like an existential crisis. So I felt at the time, I was like, man, I feel like he wrote this letter to me. Like, this is exactly what I needed to read right now. And again, like, just kind of filed it away. Didn't really revisit it with any regularity, until I saw it pop back up again online, years later. And again, now it's like an annual thing that I'll read.
Huh. You mentioned earlier talking about or thinking about writing a book of the stories you had from working in the newsroom.
Yeah,
Did you ever read the Rum Diary, the Hunter Thompson book?
yeah,
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 I think that was I think that painted a picture of journalism that I thought was going to be. I think that's why one of the reasons I went to grad school for journalism, and then didn't realize it probably wasn't going to be much like that, semi-fictional book he wrote
yeah.
about newspaper life in I guess that would have been like the '60s, right?
Yeah, which was very different than how it would have been like in the 80s and 90s, and certainly like in the early 2000s. I mean, I remember, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but when I worked in the newsroom, talking to the guys, almost all guys, who had been there for a long time, and hearing some of their stories of when they were my age. They were probably 50, 60 at the time. I was in my early 20s, so going back, 30, 40 years. And I'm like, that's crazy town. Like, that's absolute crazy town. I mean, we had this guy, I mean, now you got me started. I mean, we had a guy who worked in the newspaper named Bud Barth, greatest newspaper name ever. And he covered hockey and boxing primarily, and he was our boxing writer and used to go to all the fights at the casinos and would go to Vegas for all the big fights. And older guy talking about how when he was covering fights back in like the 70s, how like all the boxing writers were like doing drugs ringside, like just all this crazy stuff that used to happen. He's like, I would be blitzed out of my mind, and I'm trying to like file a story for like that night. It's just like you hear all this stuff, like very Hunter S. Thompson esque, in that way. And part of me is like, that's just not me. I'm like, thank God I wasn't around during that time, and thank God that's not how things are now. But I'm like, that's just wild, Like anyway.
Yeah, to close the circle with Hunter Thompson, I believe during the Rumble in the Jungle, the Ali Foreman fight in Zaire,
Yeah.
he like missed the fight, and he was like, I just remember somebody has maybe he wrote about just floating in a swimming pool somewhere during the fight and just missing the entire thing because he was on a bender of some sort. And
Yep.
yeah, so that was happening. Okay, Stephen King's book on writing, wonderful book about writing. I would argue he makes it seem like it's really, really not that hard to do, which apparently isn't for him. Like he's like lays out the steps you need to do, and I'm like, cool, man. And then just every book I ever write is a bestseller, just like you. Like, what? When did this come into your life, and how is it important?
So it came into my life in sometime between 2005 and 2010. I don't remember the exact year, and I know it was then because it was after. No, so I guess it would have been 2006, 2010. It was after I finished working on the desk at the newspaper, which was around 2006. In 2010, when I took the job at Competitor Magazine and moved out to San Diego, because I remember taking this book with me to San Diego. It is to this day the only Stephen King book that I have ever read. Which I don't know, I don't know what that says, but I remember like just reading, I would read a lot of interviews with writers, and enough of them had mentioned this book that I knew I had to pick it up for myself. So I went to Barnes and Noble and I picked it up. Still have the copy right here. And I wanted to be a writer. I was very serious about it. Like, this is what I want to do. I want to write about, running mostly. And even though Stephen King, as far as I know, probably has never run a day in his life or written about running, I respected his output. I respected how highly looked upon he was amongst other writers. Like he's got to know something. I mean, he's put out however many. I mean, way more books since then. But I'm like, he's put out all these books. He's had numerous bestsellers. People are like, waiting outside the bookstore for his new books to drop. Like, I wonder what I can learn from him. And I think you make a good point. I mean, the way that he lays it out in this book, it's like, well, it's not really that hard. You just put your butt in the chair every day for a set amount of time, and eventually a book's gonna come out of it, and people will buy it, and then you sit down, you do it all over again. I mean, and that's kind of what he's been doing for, I mean, just like decades and decades and decades. And like I have just like passages of this book like that are. I'm looking at it now, are we on video? I mean, I know we're on video, but is like video getting recorded? I have like this sheet right here that I have like page 47, end of, chapter 20. Like these are just like passages. Page 94, last graph. Page 110, notes on vocabulary. Page 125, writing is refined thinking. Page 126, rewriting. Page 151, daily writing goal. Page 175, in quotes, like keep the ball rolling. So like I, big, kind of quote person. I take a lot of notes, like this sort of stuff, but I still like have all that stuff in this book. And I will like, go back to it still from time to time, mostly when I need a kick in the ass. Really, I mean, everything that he writes, it's to me, I'm like, yeah, this is just common sense. It's really simple, but it's really, really hard to do. And I think he's just been better than 99.9% of people of like doing it. And it's worked out pretty well for him.
I have a couple questions. Well, do you not underline anything in that book that you own that old paperback that you have? Is that what you
Oh,
have it?
yeah, things are underlined, but then I kind of created this, this, I guess you would call it like maybe an index type of thing, just to make it easier for me to find like specific things. So like I definitely have like, lines underlined and paragraphs bracketed, but here I have like the page identified and then like what it was that was on that page that was like interesting or meaningful to me. So I think that just jogs my memory a little bit. It's like, oh, I'll go back for this, rather than being like, hey, I knew he said this thing about, adverbs. Where was it? And it's like I can just reference my little index thing here and go right to it. So
Right. Just a note too. He did write the Running Man, but under a pen name, Richard Bachman, which is not technically a book about running. Although, I
I've
mean,
not read that.
oh, it's the main character. It's like a game show set in the future where they pick a poor person and the poor person has to run from these
Mm,
people who are trying to kill him. And Arnold Schwarzenegger plays the main character in the movie. But it
yeah.
kind of came out in the mid 80s, and he wrote it under this pen name, Richard Bachman. And I think he wrote another book under the same pen name. And I'm not sure, I forget why he did that. But there's this whole story about this guy who worked at a bookstore looking up who had registered the ISBN number or something like that and realizing it was Stephen King. And Stephen King calls the bookstore and talks to this guy and is like, hey, okay, so I guess you figured it out. What do you want to do? And they end up, basically going
Huh.
public and saying, oh, yeah, this is actually Stephen King. But
I did not know.
yeah, I read that book when I was like 14, I think. Um,
Yeah.
you said something to the effect of, yeah, okay, you said something to the effect of all the stuff in this book seems like common sense, but you need a kick in the ass. Is there any parallel for you with coaching, like the things you tell runners or athletes where I guess I feel like this as a writer, um, sometimes our job is to just like
Yeah.
say these things that people know but they haven't quite found the words for yet, and
Yep.
you're like, oh, does the world need another book about creativity or another book about running? And it's kind of like, yeah, if it has like just this 4 or 5 degree tilt to it, it could be the
Hmm.
exact right thing somebody needs to hear. Do you have any of that in your coaching, or am I totally off base here?
No, if I'm understanding the question correctly, the parallel that I draw, so like in on writing, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but Stephen King says like if you want to be a writer, you've got to be a reader first. Like you've got to read a lot, before you can expect to, half decent as a writer. And I'm like, yeah, makes sense. Like that's like of course, like how, if you're gonna be like writing these things that people read, like you should read a lot first. Like it just seems like common sense to me, but he just puts it out like so plainly and matter of factly, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna read a lot. And like I remember that just being really impactful on me. And, as a coach, which, I've been doing it just as long, like, 18 years to varying degrees, there are a lot of things I just assume or maybe like take for granted that other people should know. I'm like, so if someone comes to me like, I want to train for a marathon and I want to achieve this specific goal, break 3 hours or whatever it is. I'm like, okay, cool. Here's what's going to take. And, I write out the training schedule. I give them an idea like what the training schedule is going to look like. You'll be doing long runs that are this long. You'll be doing these types of interval workouts. Your weekly mileage is going to be this. It's going to be a lot of work. Like, okay, yeah, I got it. Yeah, I got it. And I'm like, um, and in order to support that workload, you've got to recover and take care of yourself, and sleep a lot and eat well, and um, all this stuff. Like stuff. I'm like, to me, it's just like common sense. And some people hear me say that, and they're like, oh yeah, like I get that, but I wouldn't have thought about it if you hadn't, if you hadn't put it. And like to me, I'm like, that's just obvious. Like similar to how Stephen King writes, he's like, well, if you want to be a great writer, you've got to read a lot first, type of thing. So I think the parallel there is like as a running coach, like, all right, well, if you want to do this, and this is what you want to be a marathoner, you've got to run a lot first, but you've also got to like take care of yourself so that you can run a lot. And I don't know if that's an exact like, parallel, but I kind of think about it in the same way.
Like there's nothing that's too, you don't assume that people know anything maybe when you're starting with them.
I try to, yeah, I try to approach it that way. But sometimes I just, some of these things are so ingrained in me that I'm like, oh, of course, everyone knows like a certain thing, and then someone will follow up with a question like, well, what do you mean by that? And I'm like, oh, all right, it's not, quite that obvious, and then I'll explain it, and it's a very like simple, straightforward, you know, explanation, just like that. And they get it. It clicks for them. I'm like, oh, I needed to do that, and I feel like that's what this book was for me, and why I keep revisiting it. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's what it is, but it's had a profound influence on me. I mean, I'm sitting here talking to you right now, and you can't really see it, but like my desk is in the corner. And wherever I've lived, like my desk has always been in the corner. And there's, a line in the book where Stephen King says, he's like, it starts with this, put your desk in the corner. And every time you sit down there to write, remind yourself why it isn't in the middle of the room. Life isn't a support system for art. It's the other way around. And I mean, it's just like my wife has asked me, she's like, well, why don't you move the desk to like the middle of the wall? I'm like, no, it's got to be in the corner. Uh, and it's like, that's all Stephen King. And, I'm sure I could do just as much if it were like 3 feet to the left of me, or if it was like in the middle of the room. But, I remember reading that like during a very formative time for me. And I was like, well, whenever I have a desk, it's going to be in the corner because Stephen King said so.
Yeah. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody by explaining this more, but my favorite part of that book is that the story about when he buys his wife the hairdryer.
Yeah.
Like that's the absolute, it's just such a touching moment from a very innocent time in his career. And you're just like, that is amazing, man. I'm so glad you put that in that book.
I need to do like a full reread of it one of these days, because I the way I do use it now is I go back to my little index and I'm like, what am I looking for? And I go right to that and I read it and I'm like, all right, good, got it. That's what I needed. And I get on with my day. But I need to do like a full reread of it, because I do think, as I was saying earlier, rereading it, something would jump out at me that I had totally forgotten about, or maybe didn't take notes on the first time around. Because probably a lot of the things that I struggle with now aren't the same things I struggled with when I first read this book in my mid-20s. So
Right, right. It's interesting to think how all that changes too, and like what are the obstacles now? Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, number 4. This was the only one I had no familiarity with at all. You just wrote down, or you typed John Gruber's Daring Fireball.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that and when you found that?
Yeah, so Daring Fireball is a blog that an Apple enthusiast named John Gruber started back in 2002, I believe. And I've not been reading it for that long, but I was introduced to it by one of my best friends, a guy named Scott Cropper, who I worked with at Competitor back in like 2010 to, I think he was there till 2012 or so. And Scott was a developer on our digital team, and anytime I had questions about the website, I would go to Scott and he would answer them. But Scott was, up on all the latest technology. He loved Apple products. And I don't remember the specific article, but it might have been a review or something along those lines that John Gruber wrote for his website, Daring Fireball. And he sent it to me, just a link. And I read it and I was like, oh, that was really good. And then I just poked around the site. And the site, as I understand it, hasn't really changed since 2002. When everything kind of went responsive around like 2010 so that it looked good on your mobile device and your iPad and your desktop computer, he just kept it as the same static web page that he'd created himself. Like he's a programmer. He had done some design stuff, and it's very simple. The layout. It's like a gray background. White type. It's got a left sidebar. Anyway. But this guy John Gruber, he has been writing this blog now for 20 years, and he does it full time. He also has a podcast called The Talk Show, and he was writing about Apple before Apple was the company that we know it as today. I mean, he was always a Mac nerd, and just I love people who are obsessed with things, and this guy was obsessed with Apple. Like I'm obsessed with running, and um, I'm a bit of a closet tech nerd, and I can thank Scott for like planting that seed in me. But he had pointed me toward John Gruber's blog back in like 2000, 10, 11, somewhere around that time, and I've been a faithful reader of it ever since. And I just love how obsessed he is with mostly Apple, but he writes about other tech and stuff like that too. Um, but it's just like he long ago like established himself as like kind of the go-to guy for anything Apple. And when he writes about something that the company does or puts out, even when he's critical, people pay attention to it. And it's clear that he has built up just a lot of respect and kind of like capital, I guess, and in that space. But I also just appreciate how he's like with the website itself. He's like, well, if it's not broke, I'm just not gonna fix it. People like he has instructions on there on like how you can like do something very simple on your phone and it'll like bring the text up to make it bigger so that you can read it. I don't know, like everything he does is like very it's very nerdy, but it's very like thoughtful and considered, which I always appreciate. But anyway, he started writing this blog because I've heard him tell the story a few times when he was working at a software company, as an employee. He started doing this on the side, and he loved it more than his job, and was like, how can I just do this? Like, how can I just write Daring Fireball and make it my job? And he tried a bunch of different things. He sold T-shirts. He did like a membership platform before like any of the tools that we have today, like Patreon or what's the company? Memberful is the company they acquired. Like before all these like out of the box things existed. And he was a programmer, so he could do it all himself. Which in the early blogging days, this is before Blogger and anything else. Like you could only have a blog if you had the technical chops to put one together, and he did. And it's been going ever since. But he tried all these different things because that's what he wanted to do. And someone told him, they were like, John, this is never going to be your full-time job if you don't treat it like a full-time job. And he's like, you know what? You're right. And he quit his job and he went all in on Daring Fireball. Had some support from his wife while he tried to figure things out, and tried all these different ways of monetizing it so that he could do that as his career and as his job. And what ultimately worked the best and is still more or less his model to this day was sponsorship from, I don't want to say tech companies, but like in like indie tech companies. Like Apple's never sponsored his blog, or Microsoft's never sponsored his blog. It's like all these little like indie tech companies that you've never heard of who make an app or have something that they've kind of created, but that'll be interesting to his audience. And he started selling these like weekly sponsorships, and he would thank them at the beginning of the week, thank them at the end of the week, thank them like on his Twitter feed. And he would post his rates right on the website. You could reserve dates and all that stuff. And it got to the point where it was viable enough that it was making him a living. And I followed that with as much interest as I did the content itself, because I'm like, well, this is cool. Like he's a one-man show, and he's doing what he wants to do, which is writing about Apple and writing whatever the hell he wants to write. And that's his job. He can devote himself to it full time, and he like found this way to make it viable. And I was like as interested in that as I was the content, but never really thought like beyond that. But I knew that I wanted to work for myself someday, and if I could draw it up, if I could draw an ideal blueprint, it would be, all right, I'm going to be a coach and a writer. And I had been thinking about that for like a long time, and I was like, all right, like I said, this is, even years prior, I'm like, all right, this is the way of life that I want to have, but I have no idea how to do it. So I started having those thoughts again after like coming across Daring Fireball. So I was like, oh, this is inspiring. Like this guy, found a way to do it. And fast forward to, 5 years later, 2015, when I launched the Morning Shakeout email newsletter, or as an email newsletter, I was like, okay, I just want to do this thing because it's a creative itch that I have to scratch. And honestly, I had zero business ambitions behind it at the time. I mean, none at all. Hadn't even been thinking about like the business side of like Daring Fireball, but he was my inspiration to like start this thing. And I was like, do I start a blog? Do I write a magazine, book? I mean, I was working at Competitor at the time, and I really wanted this outlet where I could just, write about running, but write about the things I couldn't write about for Competitor, and in a way that I couldn't write about them for Competitor, but I could also write about whatever the hell I wanted to because it was mine. And I bought the domain, and I, thought through all these different things, and eventually decided, all right, I'm going to go with an email newsletter. This is before, like, I mean, there are email newsletters, but they weren't what they are now. There was no Substack, there was no review, there was no like, all these different ways that you could just make it. And I started the Morning Shakeout as an email newsletter, and I was like, I'm going to put something out. I'm going to put it out every week because that's what John Gruber did. John Gruber would do one big blog post every week for Daring Fireball, and then he eventually got into like, when he's doing it full time, he'd do one big blog post and then like, fill it with little snippets in between. So that was like a huge inspiration for me when I was launching the Morning Shakeout. And then fast forward a year, I had left Competitor to join a startup in San Francisco. So that's what you do. And it was, the idea behind the startup was to make running coaching more accessible and affordable than it previously was. I mean, long story short, it was a failed 3-month experiment where they ran out of money and couldn't pay me. And my wife did not like hearing that I had only 2 paychecks left. And my wife told me, she's like, well, this is your chance. You have a month to figure it out. You've always wanted to hustle. Go hustle. And I had this moment. I'm like, all right, what do I want to do? I'm like, I want to coach and I want to write. That's what I want to do. I want to like kind of like John Gruber had that moment where he's like, I just want to write Daring Fireball. I'm like, I just want to write the Morning Shakeout. And I was already doing a little bit of coaching, so I was like, well, that's easy enough to scale. I'll just take on more athletes. But like, how can I write the Morning Shakeout? And I thought of John Gruber and Daring Fireball. And I was like, I'm going to do sponsorships. I'm like, there are no other running newsletters at the time. And I was like, let me see if I could do this like sponsorship thing. And I was like, weekly sounds a little risky to me. I'm like, maybe I can go monthly. And I didn't have a ton of subscribers. I mean, I had like a little over 1,000 subscribers at the time. So, I had no idea what that meant in terms of like monetization or anything. And Matt Taylor, who is the founder of Tracksmith, is a longtime friend of mine. And he was one of my first subscribers to the Morning Shakeout. I remember from like the day I announced it, he's like, this is cool. I'm so excited that you're doing this. I can't wait to read it. Let me know if there's any way that I can support you. And he like had planted that seed a couple times. He's like, hey, is there any way that we could like, work together? And I was like, this was before I didn't have a job. I was like, I don't know yet, man. I'm just like, I'm just trying to do this thing. And, once the startup thing failed and Christine gave me a month to figure it out, I mean, Matt Taylor was the first person I called. And I was like, here's my situation. Would Tracksmith would like to sponsor the Morning Shakeout for a month? And,
So I can stay married.
yeah, so I can stay married and have some income. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I'm willing to explore that. He's like, how much does it cost? I'm like, I don't know. Like, I have no idea. So I went back to him and gave him a price, and he's like, we'll take 2 months. And I was like, I probably didn't price it high enough, but whatever. I'm like, I've got sponsors for for the next couple of months. And that's only grown from there. But that's all John Gruber and Daring Fireball. I mean, he was like, kind of the creative inspiration for what eventually became the Morning Shakeout, which was to have this, for me, it was a newsletter. For him, it's a blog. But to have this outlet where I could be creative and write about the things that I am just like, over the top obsessed with, or just things like I'm just kind of interested in, or like some half baked ideas I just want to like, put out into the world. And, that's all him. And the sponsorship model, which is still going to this day and is definitely, been refined a few times. I mean, that's also all John Gruber and Daring Fireball. And, it's interesting because now there's like, more running newsletters than you could possibly read every week. And a lot of the sponsors that are sponsoring running newsletters started with the Morning Shakeout. And that's like a little, point of pride for me, type of thing. But like, I owe all that to John Gruber, and it's still like, helping me make most of my living today. So that's where Daring Fireball and John Gruber come in. I've never met the guy. I've sent him an email once. I don't think he replied. I'd love to have a conversation with him. I've listened to his podcast. I think he jogs like very recreationally. But I would love to just have a conversation with him at some point and like thank him, because he definitely doesn't know me or know of the Morning Shakeout for being not only like my creative inspiration, but, also just kind of showing me a way that I could do this, and make part of my living from it. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
Yeah. Are you
And I still read them like every week. Yeah.
It's still up. Yeah. Are you comfortable saying how many subscribers you have now? Because you started with less than 1,000 when you got your first sponsorship.
Oh yeah. Approaching like 11,500. And that's held pretty stable the last couple of years. I mean, there's always, some natural turn and the new people sign up, but it's held right around there for a little while now.
So when you say those sponsors that are sponsoring other running newsletters started with the Morning Shakeout, can they just no longer afford you and they're going to the smaller ones now? Is that the deal, or is it like?
No, I'm really fortunate because Tracksmith is still one of my sponsors to this day. I mean, they've been with me since day one, and they're going to be partners with me through all of 2023. They're just sponsoring others as well, which is great. I mean, they're getting in front of more people that way. There are a couple brands that I no longer partner with, and that's okay. I mean, that happens. I expect it to. But I mean, Tracksmith's been with me since day one. I feel really grateful for, that relationship. I don't take it for granted. New Balance now has been a sponsor of mine for 4 years now. I think this is our 4th year working together. So they've been in for a while. Precision Fuel and Hydration has been for a while, but all of these brands are also sponsoring other newsletters as well. And I think, there have been other brands that have never even approached me who probably looked at this and were like, oh, this is an interesting space. We can partner with individuals or, media entities in this way and, really get in front of a, like an enthusiastic, audience. And, again, like what I appreciated about Gruber's approach is he had one sponsor per week. It was exclusive. And he does it in a very tasteful way. I mean, there's a tiny little, I wouldn't even call it a banner ad, but just like a tiny little visual in the left-hand column of his very like outdated website that stays there. And he does the same thing where he like thanks the sponsor at the beginning of the week, thanks them at the end of the week, also thanks him through social media. But there's only one sponsor per week. And that was very important to me because I didn't want to just take money from any brand. I mean, I'm very selective about the brands that I work with. And I also want the in the case of the newsletter anyway, the reader to have a great experience, right? So I don't want to have this newsletter every week that's just littered with ads. Because, then it's obvious you've just sold out, and you're taking money from whoever. And I mean, even now, like, cause I partner with, Tracksmith, which is an apparel brand, New Balance footwear brand, Precision Fuel and Hydration, which is like, fueling products. I'm not going to partner with competing brands because, you know, it would be bullshit of me to say every week like these are the best shoes, and then next week be like these are the best shoes. It's like no, I'm like these are actually like brands that I believe in, and whose products that I use on a on a regular basis, and I'm not just going to be here hawking someone else's products next week because they're going to give me like twice as much money, and that's happened. I mean, and you see like especially when this like someone who's self-employed and you have a brand and they're like we want to give you this amount of money, and you're like oh wow that's a lot of money, like that's really appealing.
That's
And
not happening to me, just for the record. Sorry, totally
well,
interrupt.
and you have to be like, yeah, but that's not a brand that like that has products that I use. And like, my trust with my readers and my listeners is everything, right? So, I mean, if I abuse that, people are going to know right away, and then this thing's going to fail to be sustainable. I mean, maybe it'd be sustainable for a little while longer, but it's like, you know, readers and listeners are very smart and discerning people, and I think they can, you know, they know bullshit when they see it, and that's been like super important to me from like a sponsorship models like that. I'm partnering with brands that I believe in, and that's something like I really respected about Gruber and Daring Fireball. He's like, I'm just not going to take money from any old um, app that comes my way. It's like I actually want to be able to like use the app because he gives like a personal endorsement. I do the same thing. But yeah, that's all Daring Fireball and John Gerber. Huge like both creative inspiration on me, but also also commercial inspiration, I guess we would say.
Yeah, I feel like I might be making this up, but I feel like somebody had sort of coined a term for those people who are mentors, but they don't know they're mentoring you. It's like
Mm,
a long distance thing, and it's like you've chosen them as a role model, and you're like watching what they do from afar, but they have no idea you exist. I'll try to look it up, but I have many of those as well, where I'm just a fan of the person. I'm kind of like, what are they going to do next? And
yeah.
that's a cool thing to know that's how. It's cool to know that's how the New Balance and Tracksmith mentions get in your newsletters because of that
Yeah.
sort of structure and inspiration there. Okay, number 5, a 51-second song called "Little Room" by the White Stripes. I think
I'm
this is
not
the
gonna sing it.
album. Okay, well, okay, I have the lyrics right here, but this is the album. I think this kind of blew him up, and then the next out. This was in 2000, or yeah, and
Yeah.
then the next one after this really blew him up, and this like Seven Nation Army gets played in stadiums, like
Yep.
in football and basketball games and stuff like that. But Little Room, not probably like a really well known White Stripes song. What is
No.
it? What is it about the song that makes it so special to you?
Well, before we get to the song, so White Stripes the White Stripes were introduced to me in college by still one of my best friends to this day, Bergie, who was a DJ at the college radio station WSHL at Stonehill College. And he was one of my teammates on the cross country team, but he was also one of my blockmates, so we lived in the same dorm. And um, he discovered the White Stripes while he was DJing for the college radio station, and I would listen to his show, and I was like, oh, he was like really into it, and I was like, this is cool, like I'm into it. And then it wasn't more than like a year later that they started getting some mainstream traction, and it was this album um, that that really like kind of kicked it off for them. That was White Blood Cells, I believe. But this song, which was on that album, I mean, I had listened to it, but it didn't mean anything to me, at the time. And I still love the White Stripes. I love Jack White. I mean, to this day. And I mean, it was just one of those things where similar to books, like I revisited the album, at some point in the last, let's call it 5 years. I don't know exactly, when it was, but I revisited the album, and I'm really big into lyrics, and it's, as you said, it's a short song. It's under a minute long, and I'm like listening to the words, and with some real intent for the first time. I'm like, oh, I get it. And like, I mean, it's such a short song. We should just go through the lyrics, but the song says, "Well, you're in your little room. and you're working on something good. But if it's really good, you're gonna need a bigger room. And when you're in the bigger room, you might not know what to do. You might have to think of how you got started sitting in your little room. And then it's like, da la la. At the end, that's the extent of the singing you're getting from me. But I mean, it's all, it's all right there. And I mean, I think about it, for me, like how I connect to it. And I think this is anyone who's ever worked on anything, creative. But like, I think of the morning shakeout and like, I started this thing while I was working full time at Competitor. I'd been kicking the idea around in my head, for a while. At the time, I was on Twitter, and I remember putting a tweet out and said, "Hey, this thing's going to drop next Tuesday. If you're interested in reading it, subscribe here." And I mean, I think the first issue went out to less than 200 people, and there was a good response to it, and the readership grew, and people were enjoying it, and I was enjoying working on it. And as I was doing that, eventually it kind of like got to a point where I'm like, oh shit, like I still use MailChimp to send it out, but I'm like, oh, I'm sending this out to over 2,000 people now. I got to start paying for it. This is costing me money. And then as we just talked about a little while ago, like this is what I want to be spending my time on. How can I how can I make it, part of my work, how I make a living, and monetize it. It does, like, I do think it changes your relationship to it, like kind of when you get to that point. Because all of a sudden, at least for me, like I'm a little more aware, like, oh, more people are reading this, and I need to continue doing like a good job, so that I can keep getting sponsorship to like kind of keep doing this. And honestly, I've had moments in the 7.5 years that I've written the Morning Shakeout where it like wasn't fun. At first it was just fun, but like I've put this out every week now for 375 straight weeks. I've not missed a week. And like, I'm not gonna lie, like it can be a chore sometimes. And I, I had I got to a point, I couldn't tell you exactly where this was, where I was like, maybe I'll just stop doing it. There's just too much pressure. There's too many people reading it. Even though that's cool, it's like, you start getting feedback on it, and that's weird. You're like, if I don't do a good job, like the sponsors might drop me, then I'm not going to be like making any money off of it, and then how am I going to pay for it again, like type of thing. And I had to, like, I go back to that song, because I'm like, I'm in a bigger room now. Like there's like over 11,000 people reading this thing. There's like a sponsor on it every week. Like, what do I, like, I don't know what to do. Like, it's in the songs, like, you might not know what to do. Like, I didn't know what to do. And, I do this with my runners that I coach sometimes, who get too in their head about it. Because I definitely got too in my head about the newsletter. The last two lines of the song, you might have to think of how you got started sitting in your little room. Like, before this thing was, before it had, over 10,000 subscribers, before it was like making money for me, with running, like, before you qualify for Boston, or you're breaking 3 hours in the marathon, like, you got to think about why you got started in the first place. That's a journaling exercise I have my athletes do. It's something I do all the time, and I needed to take my own advice. And this song, like, that's where it took on new meaning for me. I'm like, oh, I got to listen to this song, and I would listen to it, and like, it would force me to think about, while sitting in my cubicle at Competitor, being like, man, I really want to do this thing, and I really want to put it out because I've got X, Y, and Z to say, and I want to, do this and that, and like, I need to do that still, to this day, because it just gives me that reminder of like why I started it in the first place. And when I can do that, I feel like that's when I'm at my best, and that's when I feel like, the work is at its best. I feel like when I'm aware of the fact that there are like 11,000 plus people reading it, and like, there's a sponsor paying attention every week to how many people like clicked on their link or use their code or whatever. When I get too wrapped up in that stuff, like, it's just, or I let that affect like maybe what I put in there in a given week, it's not as fun. I don't think that's some of my best stuff. But when I just get back to like why I did it in the first place, like, that little room, that cubicle, when I was like, this is something good. I don't know what it's gonna be, but it's like something good. Like that's when it's the most fun. That's when I'm at my best with it. And that's what that song means to me. So
So to go back there, do you ever go back and read your old stuff? Like,
yep,
do you go back to Morning Shakeout number one and two and be like,
yep,
are you like, oh, I had such different energy, or holy shit, I can't believe how bad of a writer I was. Like,
all
I
those
can't believe.
things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
all those things. I just and you can go to the morningshakeout.com/ I think it's archives. Past issues. If you click off the homepage, you can go all the way back to the first issue. I mean, you scroll back quite a ways now, but you can go back and read it. And you see like you know what's kind of remained the same and sort of like what's changed. From the obvious stuff from a design standpoint, but then the writing itself and the writing itself and the tone that I use and the things that I linked off to, and I need to do that every so often. It's a good reminder, and there is some stuff that anyone who's ever put anything out into the world, you go back and like revisit some of your earliest things, and you're like, yeah, it's like a little cringeworthy. And I certainly have those moments, but some of the stuff I'm like, oh, damn, I wrote that, and I'm like, and that was like pretty good, or I'm proud of it, or I'm still doing that. And I need that reminder because you forget, you've been doing something long enough, you forget. I mean, after, 7.5 years, I'm like, I don't remember what the frick I wrote at the end of 2015. Like I don't remember. I think back to it with the morning shakeout for me specifically, like it's evolved. Like the newsletter has definitely evolved over the years. I mean, one of its primary functions when it first came out was for me to like essentially have a column and be critical of things that were happening in the sport. And I think I did a good job of that for a while, but it stopped being fun. It's not fun. And then you're kind of like reaching for things to write about sometimes. And I didn't enjoy that. And what I've always enjoyed from day one is just the part of it that's super personal, like whether it's sharing an update from my life or, like you mentioned at the top of the show, like music that I've been listening to, something that I've read or some half-baked idea that I'm thinking of. I was doing that from day one, and now I'm just doing more of it. And it's like really, I mean, I had a period like probably 5.5, 6 years in where I was just like not having fun with the newsletter anymore. And it just felt very forced. And, people were expecting a certain like, what's Mario's take going to be on this and that? And I'm like, I don't want to have a take anymore. Like, I don't want to. And like, um, I remember there was a case in running where this runner Shelby Houlihan, who's one of the top runners in the country, got busted for doping, and it was on a Monday that this happened, that it was announced, and that's when I write or put the finishing touches on the newsletter anyway. And that broke me. Like it broke me. I stayed up super late because I was like, people are going to be wondering what Mario's going to say about the Shelby Houlihan case. And to be fair, like people were, but I put all this pressure on myself to like, have the best like first take, and I thought I had a good take, and it was long. It was like 3,000 words, something like that. And I remember like I sent it out, and I just felt kind of empty. And I was like, that wasn't fun. Like a lot of work went into that, and like a lot of work goes into the other stuff too. But I'm like, none of that was like enjoyable to me. And like after that, I was like, I don't think I'm gonna do that anymore. I'm just like I'd already been not enjoying it, and that one like just was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I was like, I think I'm just going to make this like kind of more personal, more personal than anything else. And it's like evolved, and like it took some time, but it made it enjoyable for me again. Like it was like I still have that excitement and honestly wonder every week. I'm like, what am I going to write about? Like what am I going to share this week? And what do I get to explore? And like I said, like curiosity, really like creativity is just the actualization of curiosity, right? And it's like that's really what that newsletter is for me every week. But I felt like I got away from that for a while. It wasn't like what I was curious about; it was what I thought other people would be interested in. So now I just like follow my curiosity and put that in there, and really that's how this whole thing got started, and that's where the song, which when I need that Similar to how I go back to, Stephen King, and I'll read something in on writing that I need. I'll listen to that song when I just need to be reminded that, nope, got to go back to the little room, and stay true to why I started doing this in the first place.
Yeah, I think I have to remind myself that too, where it's like people don't really want to hear from somebody who's like making it feel like work. They want somebody who's having fun, and if you're
Yeah,
not having fun, it shows. And it's just
yeah,
like, man, if you're not having fun, just take a break or do something different. But it's tough week to week. I feel you. Also, I think you could probably take a couple weeks off and people wouldn't be calling for your head on a pike. I think you'd be
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, it's I don't disagree with you, and I mean the coach in me knows this, right? I mean, this is like runners who just want to run every day and not take any time off, and you're like, you could take a week off, and it's actually probably going to benefit you, and I'm sure it would with the newsletter. But I mean, certainly the endurance athletes listening to this, but also the creatives, like you kind of get in a groove with something, and then at least speaking for myself, you refuse to let go. And I'm like, no, I'm the fucking Cal Ripken of running newsletters. Like I'm just gonna keep this streak going, so that it can't be snapped. And that's, I mean, I admit, like I've definitely had some weeks where like I probably just shouldn't have put anything out.
Right.
And I did anyway. But I feel like it's in like a good place now because I do take vacation, and I do take time away from work. I realize that is important and essential to this. But like I also, at least certainly with the newsletter, it's been Tuesday morning, every week for 7.5 years, and technology is great. You can schedule things now, and it's like I can do a little bit of work, and just I let people know. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna be gone. So this is some prepackaged content. I've done stuff where I have enough back issues now where I'm like, let me just pull out some like greatest hits, like some evergreen like type of stuff, that I revisit from time to time, and like share it with like some of my new subscribers who may have missed it, the first time around. So I feel like there's ways that I can like keep it going and still um, provide value to the people who are reading it, and enjoyment to the people who it literally have come to expect it now every week. I mean, it's become a part of people's weeks, which is really really flattering. But also like give myself a bit of a break from like being up late on a Monday, because Mondays are long days for me. I mean, they're very long days. I mean, they're busy from a coaching standpoint because endurance athletes do hard things over the weekend, and you got to check in with them about that. And then I've got to like put this thing out so that it's or work on this thing so I can put it out like the next morning, and I do schedule it. But I mean, my Mondays oftentimes go from like 9 a.m. till close to midnight. Sometimes it's just like it's a long day. Not every week, but a lot of weeks it's pretty long like that. So I do take breaks from that like throughout the year. So I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it'll be a weird morning, I think, when for me, and I'm certain for people who've been reading it long enough, if and when the morning shakeout just doesn't show up in your inbox on a Tuesday. So
Just do a blank one and just says, "Tell me you love me," in reply to this email, or I'm never coming back.
yeah,
See if that helps.
yeah. So
The White Stripes, famous two-person duo. I feel like the only other one that's on the top of my head is the Black Keys, which is also a two-person rock duo. I mean, other than rappers, I guess. Um, did you watch It Might Get Loud, the film Jack White made with
I yeah
Jimmy Page,
yeah
and The Edge? Is it just those
yeah.
three?
I think that's right. I need to jog my memory a little bit
Just
on
about
this.
guitar playing,
Yep.
and like Jack White builds a guitar I think he just out of a piece of wood, like on the porch of this house, and he's very, very,
He's an eclectic and
he,
interesting man.
yeah, but you kind of feel like he wants to put that image out, I guess, is what I feel like in the movie. But my favorite part in the film is Jimmy Page in his closet full of guitars, and I think he's playing Ramble On just by himself, just like, oh yeah, this one, and he just starts ripping on, and you're just like, oh my god, this is amazing. This guy is
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's a fun film, I think. But
Yeah. I
yeah,
need to watch that again.
yeah. Well, I know you have more. Um, We've been going for an hour and 26 minutes, I think.
We could probably go for hours. I mean, maybe I won't go quite as deep on these, but some that I had thought of um, after I'd sent you my list of five. One, people can definitely search for online. It's something I link to in my newsletter a lot, but not quite John Gruber level inspiration. But there's a writer named Seth Godin, and he's had a blog for a long, long, long time. Every day, like I don't think he's missed a day for God,
20
probably
years.
20 years, like if not over that. And I mean, he's talked about his process in some places where, some of his posts are really short. I mean, like 2 or 3 sentences. Some of them are very long, but I think he um, kind of batches his writing time and he'll bang out, like maybe a month's worth, in a day or something like that. And then they just, they kind of get published. So he's not sitting there every day, which I'm like, damn, I wish I had that kind of like discipline sometimes.
I mean, to be fair,
But
some of them could be tweets. They're that short, so it's
no,
like
they are. Yeah. I mean, they're
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 great.
definitely like
Yeah.
tweet length, but he doesn't use social media either. I mean, I think he has social media, but it's just like kind of he doesn't interact with anyone or scroll or follow. He just like it just like sends out that day's blog post. But some of them could just be like a tweet, but that's a little diversion. But just his consistency is really impressive, and he just has a lot of. I mean, a lot of those posts are about creativity, curiosity, design, business, and I just they're very succinct, but he's very like clear in his language, and he's kind of like a bit of a Zen master, I think, in that way. So that'd be another one that I add, and then the other one, unless you come to visit me in Nevada, California, which I hope you do someday, Brendan. It would be great. But there's a Lutheran church at the end of my street, and we are not church going people, but they have a sign out in front of the church, um, and I think it's the caretaker of the grounds who is in charge of changing the sign. Well, he changes it every week, and it's just they're funny as hell. I mean, it's just like like whenever I'm out walking Tahoe or like I head out for a run, I go by. I'm like, oh, I wonder what's there this week, and like my wife and I just look forward to it every week. Like last week, some of them are super short. Last week was like, there's no we in chocolate. He's got a lot of puns. He's got a lot of puns in there. About the about all sorts of things like weather related things. I'm butchering it because I don't remember them off the top of my head, but they're so good. And I just imagine him, like I've actually seen him out there like putting the letters in, like it's one of those like big old school signs where you put in each individual letter. And I've seen him out there. He's an older gentleman, and I just I've seen him like doing it, but I'm just like he must be just like laughing to himself as he's putting this up there, like, oh, this is pretty good. And then he's like, he does it because I think he does it because, a lot of people see it. It's on a somewhat busy corner. There's a lot of pedestrians who go by. There's a lot of cars that drive by there. And I mean, if they don't put a smile on your face, like you're some kind of savage, I think. And I think he knows that, right? And he's just like, you know what? Someone can come by this and they could be having just the shittiest day. And hopefully this like makes them laugh. And I just appreciate that so much. But again, unless you come to Nevada, California, you're never gonna see that. But that's another just like, creative inspiration for me. Just it's like, all right, this guy's putting this out there every week just to put a smile on people's face. And I try to keep that in mind with certainly the newsletter, but anything else that I try to put out into the world. It's like, well, maybe it's not always going to put a smile on people's face, but maybe it gets them to think about something. Maybe it gets them to learn something about themselves. Maybe it just opens their eyes to something that they couldn't see before, whatever it happens to be. But just like that reminder that, oh, like people are paying attention to this shit. And it's like even if they don't, email you back to say, hey, this week's newsletter really resonated with me. Like it's definitely doing that with some people. And you and I have, corresponded about this over email. But, when I see that sign in front of the church, like it makes me smile, like, every time. And I thought of this because I'm like, I've never actually gone to the guy and been like, "Hey, thanks for doing that." It's like put a big smile on my face, and I actually told myself like when I saw like this week's is there's no we in chocolate, and I was like, if when I see him out there again, like changing the sign, and be like, "Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate that." It always puts a smile on my face, and like all of us, like I need that, right? So it's just a good reminder that like the work I do put out into the world, is impactful, even though I have a lot of days where I'm like, who the hell's reading this? Like, no one's reading this. No one cares. I'm just gonna stop, and then and then someone will be nice enough to just respond and be like, hey, enjoy the newsletter. Thanks for doing it. It's a bright spot in my week. I'm like, oh, all right. I'm gonna keep doing it.
You've pulled me out of the depths. Yeah, what's funny about the sign making guy is like it's definitely not about him at all, right? Like he's just
No,
putting the
no.
dad jokes out there and like
Yeah,
maybe people know who it is if they see him out there. Maybe people who go to the church know who it is, but like most people don't. What would be wrong with having him on your podcast?
nothing at all. I would just need to. I get like back to my. I like someone was put out like I forget what the last number was. It's like 215 podcasts or something like that. Um, Scheduling those gives me so much anxiety. Like just
Yeah.
it goes back to my like my days telemarketing at the newspaper. I'm glad I told that story now. It's like I got to cold call people and be like, hey, you want to renew the newspaper? Hey, do you want to get the Worcester Telegram Gazette? It's like, hey, you want to be on my podcast? I hate doing that. I'm like, I'm just like I'm very shy, but I have to. I mean, I've put out 215 episodes, so I have to get over it. But it gives me a tremendous amount of anxiety every time. And if there's a limiter in asking the sign guy to come on the podcast, it's just going up to him and being like, hey, you don't know me. You don't know what I do, but I have this podcast and I see your sign every week, and I really would just like to talk to you about it. Like even just talking through it with you now, I'm like, oh, that gives me a lot of anxiety. I don't know if I could do
Will
it,
you
but
come to my
yeah,
house?
maybe,
Yeah.
could you come to my house? Like, I don't know.
I mean, you might as well just talk to him and see where it goes. It could go nowhere, but at least you could express your gratitude to his for his art.
At,
I don't
at,
know,
at
man. I'm not
minimum,
trying
I'm going
to
to
be
do
rude.
that. I don't know if he'll
Yeah.
ever be on my podcast, but at minimum, I am going to just come up with the courage to be like, thanks, man. Like, put a smile on my face. Keep it up.
Yeah, I think it's such a giving thing to just do that, and just like put it out there with no, like, oh, he doesn't care if anybody steals his joke. He doesn't care if like, it's probably photographed. There's probably an Instagram account for it where it's just photos of the sign, or something like that. But I don't know. That's refreshing, I think, these
Yeah.
days. Maybe it takes somebody who's a senior to be doing that too. Not care about notoriety or being, getting any sort of money for it or anything like
Yeah,
that.
I don't think he wants to be seen. I mean, I don't know when I've seen him, changing it a few times. I don't know if he has like a certain time of the week when he does it. But he's definitely not trying to draw attention to himself when he does it. I don't see him like at least from what I can tell when I go by, it's not like he's sitting there at like the window of the church being like, oh, is someone like looking at my sign or pointing at it or like taking photos. I'm fairly certain he's not doing any of those things. So
All right, is that your two bonus
that's it. Those are
items?
my two bonus ones. I'm done now.
Awesome, man. This is great. Thanks so much for doing this. I feel like we have come up from your childhood to present day really well with this list. This is fantastic.
Oh, this was super fun. It was cathartic in a way. So thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it.